G'day, welcome to today's webinar. I'm here with Alistair Lyas. Alistair, welcome. Thanks for joining.
Great to be back, Pete. Thank you for having me again, and looking forward to today's webinar.
Yeah, me too. So lots happening. So we're going to do a state of the market webinar today as at Q3 2022. Obviously, this year, the market's been very different from last year, and we had a bit of a buying frenzy. This year, the media has been all about doom and gloom and the market downturn, but it does seem we're getting pretty close to the bottom, if not there already. So we're going to run through today how to buy in a dip, and also towards the end of the webinar today, we're going to look at some of our top recommended suburbs and why we recommend those locations. Just a bit of a background about what we do. So we're a national property buyers agency. So we've got a panel of buyers agents. We buy in every state and every territory around the country, and we're fully independent. So if you come to us for advice, we've got no vested interest in whether you invest in property in any particular state or territory. We'll always look out for your best interests, and with the strategy, look to adopt the strategy that's most appropriate for your circumstances. And we do have stats and data to back up those recommendations, as we'll come on to later on in the webinar. So just a bit of a background first about what we do. So we've got a property strategy service, so a 10-year property plan that we build for our clients. That service is called WePlan. We actually do have some useful tools that you can access for free on our website for a short time, including a report called Where to Buy, which tells you, based on your parameters, some recommended suburbs and locations and where and what to buy. Very powerful tool, algorithm driven, so a lot of statistical backup there for recommendations. And as I mentioned, we do have a traditional full service buyers agency model, but also for people who've got a lower budget, and if you already know where and what you want to buy, we actually have a negotiation and due diligence property buying service called WeBuy. So that's just a bit of an overview of what we do. Al, before we jump in, let's just give listeners a bit of background. So my name's Pete Wargent. I've been in the real estate industry for the last dozen years. I've been an investor for a lot longer. One of the leading property market analysts and commentators in Australia. I'm also a chartered accountant as well as a licensed real estate agent. Did the financial planning qualifications many moons ago as well. Alistair Lyas, you've been around the traps even longer than me. Tell us a bit about what you do and your background.
Yeah, around about 2000, Pete, I entered into the property industry as a young buck salesperson. Since then, I've bounced around to quite a few different jobs. Being corporate was a large part of my career as well, heading up a large real estate franchise business. And look, in the last couple of years, coming over to the buying side, which is a pretty exciting change for me. So it's been a good learning curve over the years, and certainly picked up a lot of different knowledge along the way as well.
Yeah, and one of the great things about Alistair's background, having lived in a number of parts of Australia, he's got insights into various real estate markets. And as I say, that's one of our points of difference. We've got a centralized business, but we do invest all around the country in every state and every territory. So we're going to start from the top down, just look a bit about what's going on at the macro level in terms of the economy and the housing market, and then we'll drill down to our recommended buys in recommended suburbs towards the end of the webinar. So stick around because there's some very valuable information there. So I guess things have come a long way since the pandemic panic. It wasn't so long ago that in the lockdown months, people were forecasting 12 or 15% unemployment. As things played out, the government in Australia put in place a very large stimulus package, and also interest rates were cut effectively to the zero lower bound. And here we are today with an unemployment rate at 3.5%, lowest in 50 years. To the extent that the economy, not only has it recovered, it's actually in some parts been overheating. So a nice problem to have in one sense. And certainly things are looking very, very different from how they were in April, May, June 2020. If you actually zoom in the graph a little bit, you'll see the unemployment rate just come off the lows. And I think actually the Reserve Bank might not be too unhappy about that. If you've been around the traps, you'll have seen all the adverts, cafes and shops struggling for staff. That problem is just starting to right itself. Certainly very noticeable. I've been in Melbourne this week, but Al, I think the same in Brisbane. You're just starting to see people come back into the country, particularly international students as well.
Yeah, a little bit of normalcy and travelling around the traps, Pete. You do see a noticeable difference. I'm on the road quite a lot, back and forth between New South Wales, Victoria, and Queensland, and along the way you did see a lot of notices on windows saying we are short-staffed and that sort of thing. And there's been a noticeable difference the last couple of months, definitely. So yeah, we're getting back to that pre-pandemic feel to a degree, Pete.
I think this is one of the biggest factors or push factors for the housing market over the next few years. We lost something like 600,000 temporary visa holders through the pandemic. Now they're starting to come back. We got 50,000 students in a month just recently for the start of the spring term. Eventually, we're getting the tourists, and eventually we'll get the backpackers as well if the flight costs ever come down. But as well, if you look at what the Labour government has put in place, they've increased the permanent migration cap to the highest ever level in Australia's history. So in the next 2 to 3 years, we'll see Australia's population go from 26 to 27 million. That's a million reasons why property is going to be a good investment over the next few years. A huge demand for housing, particularly for rental properties. We do know this year, as interest rates have gone up, though, the property sales have just been slowing down a bit. Al, I know we've seen that a little bit in terms of our inquiry. A lot of people interested in buying, but a lot of people have been sitting on their hands just weighing up what's going to happen to interest rates, I guess.
Yeah, if we reversed 12 months ago, and I mean, it was really hard to take a breath, Pete, because it was just so busy. A lot of frustrated people out there, trying to find somewhere to live or trying to make a decision on an investment property. People who made that decision early in the pandemic obviously have benefited greatly. But yeah, this year, there's been that bit more breathing space. People are taking the time to plan, look at a strategy, and now that we've got the actual luxury to do so, and whereas I was working with people for maybe a week last year, now we're working together on looking at their property strategy and where to invest, and we can be doing that now for weeks, if not months, in some cases.
It does kind of make sense to a certain degree. I think when the property market's really firing, I think people think, well, if I delay too long, I'll simply be paying more in a month's time, and the reverse does hold true in a down market. But that having been said, I think we're actually at or very close to the bottom of the market cycle now, as we'll come on to. And in that regard, you don't want to leave things too long, because then if you're bidding against multiple other buyers, then it's much harder to get a bargain, of course. I think this is if you look at all of the fundamentals of the housing market, immigration's coming surging back. We've got record high employment, unemployment rate lowest level in over 50 years, or just coming off those lows, and record high job advertisements. So there's a job for every person who wants or needs one at the moment. There's just one thing that's really been damaging confidence, and that is interest rates. A lot of younger buyers or market participants have never seen interest rates going up, let alone going from 0 to 2.6 in half a year. So that's obviously we're coming from a record low, but it's the fastest tightening cycle that we've seen, well, basically since 1994 was the last time we had anything like it. If you look there, though, just at the time of recording, the Reserve Bank has finally cooled its jets a little bit. We had 4 50 basis points hikes in a row, but just slowing down to 25 basis points this last month. And I think now you can see just from the inquiry, just from talking to people around the traps, that actually people realize we're getting pretty close now to the peak of the rate hiking cycle. If you take CBA, I think we'll have one more hike to 2.85. At the other end of the spectrum, some economists think we'll get 2 or 3 more hikes potentially. But anyway, you look at it, we're getting pretty close now. If you look at the various factors around the world, we've talked about some of them. Part of it is getting labour supply back, just taking the pressure off capacity constraints. Other things as well in terms of inflationary pressures will start to roll over in due course. Al, let's take a look at what has been happening in the lending environment. I guess one of the things we've seen with interest rates going back up from zero is that in the current environment, regulators got an unusually high 300 basis points lending assessment buffer, which means, in plain English, if you're borrowing at 4.5%, the bank's going to stress test you at 7.5% to make sure you can still make the repayments. So this has had, Al, it's had a bit of an impact, I guess, on how much people can borrow, down 20 to 25% in some cases. But I guess in some instances, this is just leading people to get on with it because they want to buy before their borrowing capacity comes down a bit.
Yeah, seeing a fair bit of that, Pete, and obviously with the recent price rises over the last couple of years, it's really sort of pushed up the affordability for a lot of people. So with the interest rate increases, then with that borrowing capacity, it does push a lot of people into the same buying bracket. So you are sort of finding that in some parts of the market, in different price brackets, it's a lot tougher to purchase than it is in others as well. So, there's been more movement in that higher end that I've actually seen. And whereas if you're sort of looking between maybe 500,000 to 700,000, in a lot of areas, it still is quite tough to find that right property.
Yeah, and in fact, we've certainly seen in Brisbane a bit more interest in people buying townhouses and units for exactly that reason. Borrowing capacity not going as far as it was a year ago, and also prices have been on the move in some of those markets. In particular, we've noticed a lot of our clients are just paying way too much. I think sometimes you can pay a bit of a loyalty tax by staying with the same bank. I think at the very least, it's worth getting in contact, pick up the phone to us, have a shop around, because if you get quoted a better mortgage rate, even your existing bank might just bring your mortgage rate down. Banks are so keen to retain business at the moment. We've seen in many cases, not only clients getting a better mortgage rate, but also getting a cashback from banks. So you don't want to pay a loyalty tax or stay in a mortgage jail just because you want to stay with the same bank. Definitely good time to shop around, make sure you're getting the best possible rate. So either pick up the phone or shoot me or Al an email, and we can take a look for you to see if you can get a better rate, because there's nothing worse than paying more than you have to, as Kerry Packer once said. So let's just take a quick look at demographic changes, Al. It's been a very unusual couple of years. I think what we just started to see this year, you can see the number of arrivals now shooting up by the month. I think actually we do get a bit of a spurt in the spring-summer term for international students, but generally in Australia, it's usually the warmer summer months that bring the biggest population growth. I think a lot of Aussies have been over in Europe last few months, spending their money over there with a long overdue holiday. But I think that the big picture is the borders are open, and the trend for the last couple of years has been people moving out of the CBDs because they had living in high-rise buildings where they couldn't use the lift and so on. It was very impractical. But the return or the opening of the international borders will mainly benefit Sydney and Melbourne, because those are the two cities where new arrivals tend to head to first and foremost. But Al, last 12 months, we've seen record high interstate migration on a net basis up to your neck of the woods, southeast Queensland.
Yeah, no, you see it very, very noticeable. I mean, last year we were getting a lot of inquiry, people wanting to cross that border, and it wasn't just a case of just escaping lockdowns. A lot of it was people really reassess where they were at in life. The pandemic had a pretty profound effect on the way people were thinking about their lifestyle, and obviously Queensland was a big part of actually doing that. The affordability is also the other thing as well. We look at these people coming back into the country, they're all going to want somewhere to live, most of them probably being renters. And then, with that hybrid model, but also with that remote work model as well, people have got that choice. And you'll be interesting to see whether we still are getting a lot of people from Melbourne, Sydney actually moving into Queensland just for that reason.
Yeah, I think the working from home phenomenon has been a big part of it. Queensland, particularly southeast Queensland, from Noosa, Sunshine Coast down to the Tweed and Gold Coast, including Brisbane. Those areas tend to be very popular with lifestyle movers, and the ability to work flexibly or remotely has been a huge driver of that trend. you can just see there in July, just suddenly the number of long-term arrivals, permanent and long-term arrivals into Australia a year ago was basically zero, back to 60,000 in a single month in July. So we're not back to full speed just yet in terms of immigration, but it's in the post. And as I said, we can expect there to be a huge population pressure over the next 2 to 3 years as immigration comes back on trend. Just having a look at what's been happening in the market. Well, we've got record low rental listings already, and that's before immigration ramps up. Been talking to a few people in Melbourne. I think a part of this trend is that some people moved out to places like Geelong and Bendigo and Ballarat, but now they're scooping up city crash pads because they're in the office maybe 2 or 3 days a week. Definitely been a lot of people bought holiday homes or second homes through the pandemic. So there's a few different factors at play, but I think, Al, any way you look at it, the rental market is really in crisis territory because we're not really building enough in terms of supplying the rental market anyway. And yeah, as you mentioned, people coming into the country at a rapid pace now. And I think especially actually your way in Southeast Queensland, there's been a lot of rental market pressures up there.
Yeah, it's certainly in different parts of the country that's been extreme, and particularly southeast corner. We look at Adelaide as well, and that's another area where we're seeing those record lows, the vacancy rates. Yeah, certainly southeast corner is a big part of it. What I'm sort of seeing at the moment is that a lot of chatter online, people actually openly saying, "I need somewhere to live." Just putting that request out there. Rents obviously going up. Talking to landlords and so forth, and investors, and they're saying that they're getting a rental increase pretty much every time they're able to. Property managers suggesting it. You sort of then have to ask, well, where does it stop? Really, there's got to be some sort of balance, because it's going to get to the stage where, a lot of people are just not going to be able to afford it.
Yeah, I think it is actually getting to that point now already. You generally do find that rents tend to be tied to incomes to a certain degree, and you can only see landlords lifting rents so far before there's pushback from tenants. And I've seen a bit of that recently up on the Sunshine Coast, and a few properties sitting vacant because tenants aren't prepared to wear the significant increases that have sometimes been imposed. The graph is from SQM Research there, by the way, just a shout out, very good free data they provide. You can see there that the capital city asking rents up 20% over the past year. So when we talk about there not being many forced sellers around in the market, that's a part of it. We've got unemployment rate at 50-year lows, but also most landlords have seen rent increases as well. So although mortgage rates have gone up, there's not many people been forced to sell just at this point in the cycle. So property listings are off the lows if you look at SQM's figures, but stock levels still overall are relatively tight. And it depends to some degree on the market. I think well renovated homes, particularly in the current market, there's a bit of a shortage in some cities. But we haven't really got the glut of property that we saw, 6 or 7 years ago.
No, you just don't see those signs out there at the moment, Pete. And obviously things have been moving pretty quickly, and it'll just be interesting to see how long that lasts for until it actually catches up with the market, potentially turning around a little bit next year. I can't say we're going to get back to those same sort of stock levels, as you say, as we had been saying.
Yeah, I think we are going into the spring selling season. Of course, you'd expect some kind of an uplift. But at the moment, anyway, relatively speaking, stock is quite tight. Now, we did mention we would look at some locations and some of our recommended suburb picks. So we'll run through some of those. There's been lots going on in terms of tax legislation changes. We don't need to spend too long on that today, but the Queensland government famously proposed and then legislated a new land tax, which has since been repealed. So we don't need to spend too long on that, except to say it's no longer in place. So there's no punitive land tax changes coming for Queensland. I think it is worth, though, if you're not sure about what's happening in the market, just getting in contact, particularly, for example, if you're a first home buyer. There's first home buyer guarantees available. There's also a change coming for first home buyers in New South Wales, may not have to pay stamp duty from early next year. So but there's a few different things going on in terms of tax legislation, available grants, and so on. I think one thing that we already sort of touched on it, I guess, is that if you're buying or borrowing today, you do need to factor in that interest rates will likely rise a bit further from here. Of course, you will be stress tested on that basis anyway. Al, this is one question that we get an awful lot. Should I buy today or should I wait until next year when the coast seems a bit clearer and things are back to normal? My view is usually, if you've got the finance capacity and you're taking a long-term view, you're probably better to buy when there's not many people buying at the same time. But what do you what sort of discussions have you been having with prospective buyers on that?
Yeah, well, most people, when they inquire, that's one of their main questions in this market. What do we do? Do we buy now or do we wait? I mean, the truth is, I mean, you can wait later on down the track, and as you say, you're going to have more competition as more people feel comfortable. A lot of good investors and smart investors over the years know that when other people aren't buying, it is actually a good time to buy. And we do talk about your investment being long term, so it may go down a little bit in the short term, but realistically, if it's not putting any financial pressure on you, you shouldn't have to worry about it. So just that lack of competition is actually a good opportunity out there to buy at the moment, I think. And again, if you start looking now, it doesn't mean you're having a rush purchase like we've seen over the last couple of years. You've got that little bit of luxury of time. A good buyer's agent knows that really having that power to negotiate strongly, that power to negotiate strongly may not be there as much, come next year when things turn around a bit.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things with the housing market. It's not quite the same as the stock market. It only takes 2 or 3 interested bidders, and suddenly it's not quite so easy to snag a bargain. So things, as we saw after the 2019 election, things suddenly turned around very quickly. May not snap back so quickly this time. It might grind along the bottom for a while, but same principle really. Particularly for sort of A-grade quality assets or the more popular property types. So just on to sort of bullet points or recap on some of those things. I think the key thing is that real estate tends to work best as a 10 or 20-year investment, and trying to time the bottom of the market to the week or the month is not only impossible, it's not always that practical either. I think the key thing that is really sort of changed in terms of sentiment is that people can see light at the end of the tunnel now in terms of interest rates. I think a few months ago people were like, well, gee whiz, if the cash rate keeps going up at this pace, it could get quite hairy. But we're starting to see things coming back into balance gradually, which is giving people a bit more confidence. I think as well, people are eventually weary of some of the doom and gloom headlines. When the media cries wolf for too long and prices don't fall that much, then people start to just either tire of it and just get a bit more confidence. But as Al mentioned, there plenty of scope for strong negotiation at the moment, even on the best A-grade properties. Be patient, but you can definitely negotiate hard. Now we're going to talk about some of our recommended suburb picks today. So we don't need to spend too long on this slide, except to say, obviously, there's a national property buying company with buyers agents in every state and every territory. It's one thing to pick a suburb, but you do still need to understand the local area. Suburbs often have a good side and a bad side. There's things like flood risks or development approvals to take into account. So today we're going to talk about suburbs, but you do always need to get local knowledge, expertise, and do full due diligence. Don't just buy property blindly. Al, just give us a quick rundown on some of the things we look for in terms of location picks.
Yeah, it's really 2 parts to it, Pete. We look at the broader area for a start, obviously looking at different parts of Australia, what's actually driving them at the moment. So where they're at the price cycle, we like to be earlier in on that clock as far as that goes. Very unique, different things like what are the suburbs that are gentrifying. A lot of people make the mistake of buying a property. It might be a bit newer, a bit shinier, and they sort of feel it's nice, but they're buying it potentially on the edge of a city. There's a lot of a potential oversupply coming into that as well. That starts to really limit your capital gains as you go. So it really is about looking at good established stock in areas where the price cycle is a little bit earlier. And because as you know, it's the actual land itself is usually 70 to 80% of what makes something an A-grade asset at the end of the day. So really looking at the right area, researching the things you can see on the screen is very, very important, because if you make the mistake, well, you know, your asset's not going to be a very poor performer really over, say, a 10 to 20 year period, when you could have bought something that is going to put you far, far ahead, and also getting that equity in the property to grow your portfolio.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I mentioned our where to buy reports, and they do factor in all of the supply and demand factors that drive capital growth by suburb and by property type. But as a general rule, we look for landlocked suburbs where the supply is somewhat constrained, proven track record of capital growth, of course. And I guess the old adage of property is that land appreciates and buildings depreciate. Don't necessarily need to take that at face value, because building costs do go up over time. But the point being, it's really the location and the land value that does the heavy lifting for you over the life of the investment. And that's why we like to buy, whether it's a house or a townhouse or even a unit, we want to buy assets where the land is the bulk of the asset value. So that generally means, for units, in a boutique block rather than a big high-rise tower. So remember that it's the land that appreciates. So just a few tips in terms of what our buyers agents look at when they're buying a property. I mean, there's a whole lot more to this list. This is just a few points if you're looking to buy property yourself. But the list of due diligence checkpoints that a buyer's agent will go through, obviously a lot more comprehensive than this. But there's a few traps to try and avoid, I guess, when you're buying property. Things like noisy traffic or flight paths, development approvals nearby that you may or may not have thought about, zoning changes. Also, if you're buying interstate, you just need to be wary of the different laws by state. And there are certain things you really don't want to pick up as problems as a property buyer or property investor. Things like problems with roofs tend to be very expensive. Also things like termite damage and so on. But as I mentioned, the due diligence checklist is, of course, going to be a lot longer than this. So Al, just before we pick our or go through our suburb picks, just a couple of things there in terms of the buying process. You just want to give us a quick rundown?
Yeah, no worries. I think one of the big ones there, Pete, is having a strategy in the first place. We've got our We plan, of course, which is our 10-year property strategy, where we work with people to really map that out. And I think a lot of people go into it, they'll do a bit of homework. There's a lot of different information out there. People will be dealing with off-the-plan salespeople. We tend to steer away from that just due to the risk factors. It really is just sitting down, understanding what your plan is, what your strategy is, and working that out. And then once you've done that, you can then bring in a whole lot of different factors around, well, now I know this, then, this is the sort of property I'm going to buy. How am I going to successfully achieve it? And start to really map that out. So it's about really avoiding that risk by just, being a very good planner with what it is and speaking to the right people at the end of the day. And not just putting it out there, because a lot of people get, analysis paralysis, where they just say there's so much information out there, I don't know what to believe anymore. And I deal with a lot of people that come to us in that situation as well. So what we like to do is help people just make a managed decision at the end of the day. And if they make that decision, they're going to do it very, very confidently. But look, a lot of good reasons on the screen there. You can see at the moment, number one being develop a buying strategy and just understanding the risks involved as well. So, yeah.
Yep. So we do have a 10-year affordable property planning service. So if you're not sure about what steps to take next, do pick up the phone or shoot us an email, and we'll be more than happy to help out. So let's run through some of our top suburb picks. As I mentioned there, if you can jump onto our website, you can get access to our where to buy reports. Very powerful analysis tool. This, you can do it either via your PC or on your phone, and there's a couple of screen grabs there in terms of the output, but you'll see this is very useful just in terms of determining where and what to buy. So we're going to focus today on New South Wales. A couple of reasons. Firstly, it's the state that's seeing the biggest property declines through the downturn through 2022. So best opportunities of picking up a bargain. Also mention the changes to first home buyer stamp duty regime or legislation. So from January next year, first time buyers will be able to opt to not pay stamp duty up to 1.5 million purchase price, instead opting for an annual land tax. All of the past history has shown that this will relatively quickly get capitalized into prices. So we would suggest, if you're looking as a property investor, the price bracket to look at in New South Wales, and you can arbitrage this opportunity straight away, is to look under that 1.5 million bracket, and the market will recover from the bottom up on that basis. We've just picked out some suburbs there, Newcastle and the Hunter, and also Shoalhaven down on New South Wales south coast. Al, we've mentioned there the median prices for houses in those suburbs, but of course there are property opportunities both below and above those medians.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like in that Newcastle Hunter region, there's a lot going on there at the moment. I think with infrastructure, the airport's going to have a major upgrade. That's going to be a lot more international now, which will make a lot of people potentially bypass Sydney Airport, bringing people into that area as well. And as we're seeing with the shift of people moving out of the big cities and into those regions, places people are looking for lifestyle. I mean, traditionally Newcastle was a very blue collar sort of a town. A lot of that's changing now. If you've ever been down there recently, it's pretty trendy down central Newcastle there, down by the waterside and so forth. And just that affordability level to get in there, you're actually not far from the CBD. You're not too far from the bay. And I think there's rail upgrades happening now as well. So yeah, there's certainly some good things to going for that particular region. We're looking back in Queensland now. A couple of weeks ago, we weren't advising it. Happy to say that we are definitely looking back in Queensland now as well, and some of those affordable areas. If we look at the prices on the screen, we can duplicate that in particular areas of southeast Queensland as well.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I was talking to the demographer Simon Kustenmacher a little while ago, and I guess with the change to flexible work and working from home, some of these regions, I guess, particularly those regional cities that are within 2 hours of a capital city, those are really the areas where the opportunities will be. Generally speaking, people still want to be within the gravitational pull of the capital cities, even if they are in a Bendigo or a Ballarat or a Geelong, or as you mentioned, Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, the same really. Same sort of dynamic applies in New South Wales. It's a lot of regional cities gentrifying, becoming more trendy, particularly those on the coast, as you mentioned. But still, though, generally speaking, people want to be within a couple of hours of the capital city CBD if they can. It's that gravitational pull, as Simon describes it, which makes it a lot of sense. So we took a bit of a webinar feedback poll as we went along. So it would be interesting to feed that back out to listeners in due course. As I mentioned, as we went through, if you're interested to find out a little bit more about what you should be doing next steps, we're happy to give people free access to our Where to Buy reports. And also, if you want to have a free diagnosis conversation with myself or Alistair, do shoot us an email or pick up the phone, and we'll book you in or schedule you in for a chat, and we can just talk you through some of our latest market research, risks and opportunities, and a bit of a diagnosis. Al, is there anything I need to add there?
No, I think you got it pretty well covered there, Pete. We're more than happy to have a chat with anyone, even if it's just a bit of a conversation. Do it all the time. We just love helping people here to obviously realise their property dreams.
So yeah, thank you so much for joining today. It's been a great webinar, and thanks for tuning in. Good numbers again. So it's always good to see you, and we'll be in touch in due course. And just to recap, on our We Plan affordable 10-year property planning service, we're seeing a lot of people taking the opportunity while the property market's been taking a breather, just to build out their 10-year property plan to make sure they can build their nest egg and achieve their property goals over the decade ahead. Not like buying stocks in the stock market. In property, you tend to make relatively far fewer decisions, but the ones you do make are more important. And especially these days, when you've got a limited borrowing capacity, you want to make sure that every dollar is working for you as hard as it possibly can be. And for those who are interested in actually buying a property today before the market turns around, we do have our buyer's agency services there too, as I mentioned. So thanks very much for joining today. If you want to get in contact, here's how you can do it. You can either email us, pick up the phone. You can also subscribe to our podcast and newsletter at the website there, buyersbuyers.com.au, and we're somewhat active across the socials as well. So, Alistair, thanks so much for joining today, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks all. Cheers.
Cheers.